Good morning. For the duration of this seminar, I ask you to set aside one of our most foundational assumptions, that the universe began with a bang, a moment of infinite chaos. Today, I will defend a manuscript that posits a radical alternative, a unified field theory that begins not with an explosion, but with an ordered detachment from a state of absolute, perfect stillness. Prepare to have your axioms challenged.
So, let's begin with the central thesis, the question that reframes the entire problem of cosmology. What if the genesis of our reality was not a violent, chaotic event? What if instead, everything we know emerged from a state of profound, informationally pure stillness? Here is the logical progression of our argument today. We'll begin by positing a rupture in reality, moving past the Big Bang. We will then trace the emergence of what we're calling primordial light. From there, we'll map the four fundamental forces to ancient elemental principles. This will lead us to a necessary critique of the establishment's failures, specifically string theory. We will then demonstrate how this model elegantly resolves dark matter and energy before concluding with the argument's final metaphysical implications. All right, first point of order, a rupture in reality. This is our necessary departure from the Big Bang model, which, as we will argue, describes a consequence, not a cause. So let's be very clear about the distinction. The Big Bang model is incredibly effective at describing how the universe expanded. It's a model of behavior. The proposed model, however, is ontological. It originates from a state of perfect symmetry and attempts to answer why anything emerged at all. We are shifting the question from a physical event to the source of physicality itself. This shift naturally brings us to the mechanism of emergence, what we're terming the symphony of primordial light. This is the process by which a state of perfect unity differentiates into the complexity we observe.
Let's define our origin state, state zero, or ontological absolute zero. Crucially, this is not the quantum vacuum of the standard model, which is teeming with virtual particles and exists within a pre-existing spacetime. This is a state of absolute potential, perfect symmetry, infinite coherence, zero informational entropy that precedes the existence of space and time. It is the canvas, not the paint.
The process of creation, then, unfolds sequentially. We begin with absolute stillness, no frequency, no distinction. Then, a rupture, the first oscillation, the first vibration in that perfect field, which we identify as primordial light. This light field immediately begins to modulate, differentiating into a spectrum of layered frequencies. It is from this frequency differentiation that the conditions for space-time and the fundamental forces manifest. And I want to underscore this distinction because it is the most critical point in our physical argument. The standard model's quantum vacuum, for all its energy, already operates within the rules of spacetime. It presupposes the stage. Our model's absolute zero is more fundamental. It is the state of pure potential from which the stage itself emerges. Now, how did the forces we know emerge from this primordial light? To explain this, we will use ancient elemental archetypes, not as literal truths, but as profoundly insightful symbolic analogies for the physical principles that govern reality. Let's start with fire. We map fire to the strong force. It is the principle of intense, inescapable cohesion. Think of it as the universe's resistance to total fragmentation, the inward pulling logic of the original unity. It manifests physically as high-frequency knots in the light field binding quarks within protons and neutrons. It is confinement. Next, air symbolizes the weak force. Air is the principle of transformation and identity shift. It governs radioactive decay, allowing one particle to become another. In a very real sense, the weak force is the arrow of emergence. It is what inscribes the possibility of change, and therefore time, into the fabric of matter. We then have water, which is the perfect symbol for electromagnetism. It represents fluid, pervasive coherence. Electromagnetism was the first true break from unity, the initial rupture into polarity, positive and negative. It introduced oscillation, the wave. It is the prototype of separation and the vehicle for all subsequent differentiation. And finally, Earth symbolizes gravity. In our model, gravity is not a fundamental force. It is the principle of stable mass and curvature. Yes, but it is an emergent phenomenon. It is a low-energy, low-frequency modulation of the space-time field, a relic or an echo of the deeper symmetry breaking that produced the other three forces. So, to summarize the framework, Fire is the strong force, the principle of confinement, manifesting as high-frequency knots. Air is the weak force, the principle of transformation and identity shift. Water is electromagnetism, the principle of coherence through fluid oscillation. And Earth is gravity, the emergent principle of stability, a low-frequency modulation of the field itself.
Adopting this framework necessitates a direct critique of the inherited axioms that have, in our view, prevented true unification. Specifically, we must address the conceptual failures of our leading unification programs.
This statement truly encapsulates the core of the problem. String theory, for all its mathematical elegance, models the consequences of reality, not its cause. It begins its work far too late in the process.
Let's be precise. String theory's limits are foundational. It fails to explain the genesis of the forces from first principles. It simply describes their behavior. Critically, it assumes pre-existing spacetime structures in which its strings can vibrate. It offers no explanation for the origin of that spacetime. Furthermore, it relies on a vast, unobservable landscape of potential solutions with no mechanism for selecting our own, and it has produced no testable, falsifiable predictions. The core problem is this. It is a sophisticated model of behavior within reality, but it is not and cannot be a model of reality's emergence.
So what is the predictive and explanatory power of our model? Let us apply it to the two greatest mysteries in modern cosmology, dark matter and dark energy. We propose they are not new substances, but echoes of the unified field.
The theory posits that dark matter and dark energy are cosmological residues. They're not exotic particles or new forces to be discovered, but are, in fact, measurable artifacts of an incomplete detachment from the primordial unified state. Here's how that works. Dark matter is not a particle. It is the measurable gravitational shadow cast by regions of the cosmos that have only partially detached from the unified state. They exert gravity without being fully manifest. Dark energy, conversely, is not a repulsive force. It is the residual tension of the original perfect symmetry, which is still present, continuously pulling and stretching the differentiated space-time that emerged from it. And this brings us to the final leg of our argument, where the physicist must become the philosopher. Because the search for unification, if pursued to its logical conclusion, becomes a metaphysical pilgrimage. It is a search for the ultimate source. At this point in the inquiry, the tools of physics alone become insufficient. The relentless pursuit of a unified theory is, at its core, an admission of an ontological necessity. It is a recognition that the universe is not a brute fact, but an intelligible reality born from a coherent source. The search for a UFT is the search for that coherence. So, our model proposes three foundational origins. First, the physical precursor, absolute zero, the field of pure potential. Second, the mechanism of emergence, primordial light, the first symmetry-breaking oscillation. But this leaves one question unanswered. What caused the rupture? Our model proposes a third, non-physical origin, divine intentionality. Not a religious figure, but the philosophical concept of an uncaused, non-physical will that provides the most robust mechanism for initiating the symmetry-breaking event itself. And so, we must conclude that the search for unification is a metaphysical pilgrimage back to the source from which all reality, force, and form were born. Solving unification requires accepting that the origin of physical law is itself a metaphysical act, not merely a mathematical convergence. The ultimate answer lies not in finding the final equation, but in understanding the intention that wrote it. Thank you.